Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much for joining me here. I hope you're having a phenomenal day and a wonderful weekend. I want to start by saying thank you for being an amazing part of my life. Deeply appreciate the likes and the follows. Those are all starting to add up and we're getting more content out to people who haven't discovered it yet. So it's really great. Thanks again for always doing so. Make sure you enable alerts too, because I do have updates daily. Make sure you stay abreast there. We're going to talk about some important levels here on the macro structure. Some folks were asking, what is the macro looking like for Bitcoin? And generally speaking, what are your thoughts? We're going to discuss that. Same thing with some altcoin patterns here that are forming on some coins that we like to trade. Furthermore, too, some specific areas on the order blocks that are important to recognize, liquidation data, and much more. So be sure to stick around. We got an important one today. Let's take a closer look. All right, folks, before we get started, I want to kind of give you a quick heads up on some updates coming to our community. So to our community members who are trading our plus signals, quick heads up, I'm adding some AI functionality in there to automatically adjust our trades into profits and also to ensure that once invalidation occurs, the actual stop loss itself is adjusted and the loss is lower. Okay, so good stuff there. That should be able to work well with our automation. Also, be sure to take advantage of this Bitunix offer if you haven't yet already and you're part of my community, or maybe you're considering becoming a better trader and using a good exchange. $16,000 individual prize pool here. We got a significant amount of traders here trading well under that. Same thing with a $10,000 USDT airdrop. That's all linked down below. Be sure to check that out. So now that we have that information there, let's go ahead and jump into the backend data. Just kind of touch on some things here, because when you look at the order blocks, this just kind of helps us understand specifically the large amount of accumulation that people are trying to acquire Bitcoin. Okay, and obviously that tells us what direction we may or may not be going. So we have a significantly large buy order at 115,200. Okay, so that's just keep in mind there's 90 million in value, which people are somebody's trying to buy a pretty big position there. And the same thing too as well with this resistance wall, 116,500 and 300. So you kind of average that out. There's a lot more sell orders than buy orders right now, or asks over bids, and that's basically a good sign here for the short traders, but not so great for the longs. All right, so just kind of giving us first perspective. This doesn't mean everything. It just kind of helps us understand specifically that these are areas of interest, right? Same thing as well here too. If we look in the center, this kind of tells us a little bit more specifically. We got what, 863 Bitcoin up for grabs there at 115.2 and 700 to 600 in the range of 116.5. So those are just some areas to kind of think about, because we'll probably like to see the price action reject off those areas. Before we jump into liquidation, let's double check some year over year here stuff, just to kind of give some perspective on where we're at. So for the current month, which it hasn't finished yet, we should have experienced a 2.52% decrease in overall value based on the historical trends here since what, 2015. Now, when we look at this here, this data just kind of tells us that September is statistically the least favorable month. So we average the worst amount of returns in September. So the truth is, if you look at the last 2 years in September, we've seen a 7 and a 4% increase on average for previous months. So that really doesn't tell us a whole heck of a lot, letting us know that basically all the patterns in previous trends has changed since big money's got involved. So there's a big chance that we don't see a red month here and we continue to progress higher. I don't foresee us dropping 7% in the next week for Bitcoin, but once more, a lot of things can change between now and then. So just to give you some perspective, that's kind of roughly what we're looking at there for the year over year. To touch on some overviews here for some altcoins, just to quickly address some patterns here. Now, this may seem a little chaotic, but roll with me here. First of all, the top left-hand corner, we have Ethereum. We have a double bottom with a previous triangle pattern that essentially broke to the downside. So ideally, what we do is we see a trend here, right? And if the price were to retest that ascending trend line bearishly, then that may be a good consideration for a short. I've talked previously about 45.50 being that area of interest for consideration on a short, kind of that center line for that previous pattern. So just know that in combination with a double bottom, that can be somewhat of a false positive, right? So oftentimes when you're not quite sure what to do, the best thing to do is not to do anything at all. That's how trading is supposed to work. If you're ever unsure, just don't do it. Okay. Solana doesn't have any distinguishable patterns except for a bullish engulfing pattern from today here so far. That's the last 4 hours. Keep in mind, these are the 4-hour time frames. So in the last 4 hours, roughly, we've been able to see a break above that local resistance at roughly 240. Okay. So that's the approximate there for Solana. Taking a look here at SUI, we do have a bearish type of flag pattern here, as well as a double bottom. Once more, we have a confluence there in opposite directions. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means that we have too many confirming factors in both directions based on patterns alone, letting us know it may not be advantageous to consider a trade with that coin. Okay. Once more, this is a weekend. I don't generally recommend trading either, but from a macro perspective, we're going to look at that today to make sure we understand if we can see a bigger movements here. Keep in mind, this is a transitionary time frame, just kind of letting us know that, hey, we got both bullish and bearish type of patterns, right? We took a look here at XRP. It's roughly the same scenario here too. We have a type of inverse head and shoulders pattern on the larger time frames, which hasn't fully invalidated yet, but if we close below 295, it will. But at this point, descending triangle already broke out. A lot of little things here that kind of once more are conflicting. So the truth is the patterns don't tell us too much on these time frames here, and we're in a position right now where, being a weekend with low volume, these things can kind of be a little weird. So oftentimes what we've been experiencing throughout this year, as a matter of fact, on average, if we see a green Saturday, we'll see a red Sunday, and the inverse applies. It's almost uncanny how much we see that the momentum on Saturday reverse itself immediately in either direction on Sunday. Okay, so just be mindful of that. Take a look here at the Bitcoin exchange liquidation map. This basically just tells us here, overall, Bitcoin in the last 30 days, there's a significant amount of liquidation below at what, 114,500. That's the local low there for the large amount of liquidation. And once more, the largest point is 119,000 above the price. Okay, so those are two areas of liquidation, just kind of letting us know that, hey, there's a good chance we're going to see one of those two levels hit here soon. And if we look at the smaller time frame, we're smack dab in the middle of these two liquidation ranges, a little tighter at 117 and approximately 114.5. Okay, so those are just some areas to pay attention to. Now, when we take a look at liquidation, just to clarify, there's four times as many longs getting liquidated than shorts in the last 24 hours for majority of altcoins. In Bitcoin, it's like that's like a 7-to-1 ratio, and Ethereum somewhere in the range of 4-to-1. Okay, so the truth is most coins are getting hit pretty hard to the downside, but Bitcoin is actually pulling back harder than other altcoins, or liquidating more longs than shorts, if you will, and altcoins are not pulling back super hard. That speaks to altcoin dominance and altcoin season index, right? Basically just implying that we have a lot of money flowing into altcoins, and that if you're going to consider altcoin, shorting altcoins, I'd be very careful, doing significantly large bags, or just you want to kind of use appropriate leverage, because with low leverage and low position sizing, you can kind of survive these kind of ebbs and flows, because there's been pretty big swings in both directions. But the key takeaway here is that altcoins are looking very strong right now. They're not pulling back as hard as Bitcoin. And when we see less liquidations on altcoins versus Bitcoin, that's usually a good sign, right? That's typically implying that Bitcoin dominance is in pretty good shape. So all that being said, for us here, the overall sentiment is still, I would say, overview, pretty good here for altcoins. Now let's take a look at the back-end data here for Bitcoin first. Get some perspective and just kind of touch on this here. This is a daily time frame, just giving us some understanding of where the liquidation levels are at. We see a pretty heavy concentration of liquidation at 118 to 118.5. So those are shorts above the price, and obviously the range is larger for the downside, 114.5 as low as 113. Okay, so as per usual, 113,000 is going to be that support range for us. When we look at the overview here, this is a 4-hour time frame, just giving us perspective on top traders. The average top trader is opening more shorts than longs. Okay, as the price goes higher and the amount of margin being used is increasing, we're starting to see more likelihood of the price pulling back, or at least that's what they feel the market should be doing here moving forward. And generally speaking, they are the ones that control the market, right? All that being said, not much data here really to extract. This is pretty much hasn't changed too much since yesterday. When we look at the overview here for open interest here, once more, 113K is that massive amount. Keep in mind, open interest does work like a magnet in a lot of ways too, even though it is construed as support or resistance. So 113,000 seems like an inevitability at this point. It's just a matter of when that happens. So I think we see the 117K range this weekend for Bitcoin. It may be a good signal to short, considering that's a significant amount of resistance. I'll show you on the macro here what that looks like, but the key takeaway is that we have a liquidation delta at break even. That's never really a good sign to try to take a long, because we've been flatlining for the last 24 hours. Okay, and even though we're seeing a little bit of an increase for Bitcoin, there's still a lot of reasons why the price should continue lower. And once more, I'll explain more by that here in just a moment. The overall sentiment here, though, is that 118 plus is a significant amount of liquidation, and 114 to rough estimate of 110 is that local area of liquidation. So let's take a look at Bitcoin, kind of understand where we're at here. I like to look at let's go ahead and start with the 3-day time frame, just kind of give us some overviews and just kind of see where we're at. Now, to clarify, the 3-day time frame is actually looking quite good in a lot of ways. And this is a good, strong indicator. It's basically telling us that the overview, like the macro structure, is in pretty good shape. So when I say Bitcoin could and should pull back here soon, I'm really only referring to like a retest that 113K level, and then strong, distinct likelihood of the price is going to go higher from there. But once more, if we look here though, just to clarify, we have the most amount of volume above the price at 118K. So all the volume and accumulation is in the 116 to 118K range, specifically above us, therefore reinforcing resistance. When we clarify too, just to take a look here as well, on the 3-day time frame, we still have yet to close above this level. 117,000 is that strong resistance range for us. So that's an area we just got to be mindful of until we close above that level. The distinct probability of further downside is higher. Just keep in mind, overview here is not bad whatsoever. We got some pretty strong convergences here with the RSI. Even though we're seeing our money flow index taper off, we're above all moving averages here. The 3-day time frame looks pretty solid. So I do not dislike what I see there. I think it's pretty good in the overall sense, and we are more likely to go higher just in general. Now, when we look here as well, we can see somewhat of a bullish pattern too. Okay. Now, once more, it depends on the kind of time frames that you use, but generally speaking, we're in a position right now where we're probably in the midst of a bullish type of breakout, a bullish type of rectangle pattern rather. Not necessarily a breakout potential because we have a ton of resistance at 117, but more so just one of those areas that we want to pay attention to and recognize that as you start to channel in this range, as long as volume maintains itself and we continue to see higher volume, the likelihood of further upside is greater. Okay, so I do want to urge caution in trying to do some kind of wonderful, amazing trades this weekend, because this is a weekend, price action. It's difficult to see the right kind of movements with low volume. But that being said, the daily time frame is still looking pretty good. So I want to walk away from this letting you know that I have like a hashtag bullish mindset right now on Bitcoin. But I think it would be naive to think that we're just going to go straight up from here with all that juicy liquidation down below. All right, so there's that consideration there. But from an overall perspective, 4-hour time frame still looks pretty decent, except for breaking below our moving averages here. These are short-term time frame divergences. We're still maintaining above the cloud, which is positive. So there's definitely some support below us, but we're right here at 50 on the RSI. It would make perfect sense for the price to reject and continue lower in the relative near future. So I think a short-term correction to the downside, 113, still seems very much of a likelihood to me. But on the same accord, there's still some bullish macro structures here for Bitcoin that imply we're going to see a further continuation overall to the upside as well. So I would still love to get in at 113K right now. That's kind of my goal. But between now and then, it's probably best to be a little bit more patient and consider waiting for the right opportunity. What are your thoughts? Why don't you comment below? Let's go ahead and take a look at the next set of altcoins here for us. Quick heads up to my traders, make sure you take full advantage of this offer here from Bitunix. There's a significant deposit reward bonus as well as a $16,000 individual reward for just trading on the exchange. If you use my link to register in the past, you're automatically eligible. If you use my link to register now, you're eligible for all future trading bonuses and competitions. Check out the links down below for more information. All right, folks, let's go and take a quick look here at Ethereum, see what's going on the back end here. And when we left off yesterday, I was moderately bearish on the coin here, and I'm not going to go into this thinking that it's one way or the other, but when you do take a look at the charts and you start off with a mindset in either direction, you can oftentimes convince yourself of things that aren't there. So just friendly reminder, be very careful doing that. It can be easy to do in a lot of ways. I always try to remain open and unbiased in my analysis, and it's important for you to do the same. So just some friendly advice there. When I left the conversation yesterday or summarized it, it was basically, hey, I think we're going to be going down in the near future. And if that has changed today, we want to make sure to be aware of the fact that we don't want to be stubborn and stuck on one direction or the other. While I think the overall trend for Ethereum is going to go higher, we're seeing some lower timeframes as of yesterday for some bearish type of divergences. So we're going to see if those are still present. So taking a look here at the, this is a 1 month's time frame for open interest. Not much has really changed here. This coin seems to consistently kind of give us the same areas, but let's go ahead and double check the smaller time frames, just kind of see. Once more, 45.50 is that local area there of open interest. And keep in mind, those areas are oftentimes working like magnets. The price will retest those levels oftentimes, but they're also considered to be resistances or support. So 45.50 tentatively is that next area of interest and or the support level, or correction, the resistance level for Ethereum. Taking a look here at liquidation long delta, it is at 2 billion right now, which isn't super magnificent. It's pretty small, but it is still slightly bullish nonetheless. We have a ton of liquidation upwards of 4,800. So I do, I do side with the fact that we're probably going to see that further price action higher for Ethereum. Just the overall sentiment here, I feel, is pretty safe to presume we're going to go higher. Once more, that's based on a macro perspective. Let's take a look at that right now. Let's jump into the 3-day time frame. Just kind of recognize that we're above all moving averages. We're over 50 in the RSI. While money flow index is tapering off, this implies there's just been a lot of selling pressure here. But the concept remains the same, that we are remaining above all these moving averages here, and we're still in a pretty solid case here with our open interest and or that massive amount of support below us with the point of control. That's basically just a high amount of volume there. Oftentimes open interest and points of control can run consistent. So 4,300 is that area of support for us if we end up continuing a bit lower. So I wouldn't try, if you're going to consider shorting, just say hypothetically you do that, I would not consider trying to short to the ground floor or what some people would think is like 2,000 or 3,000. That is ridiculous. That's not going to happen. The odds of that is very low. We have a significant amount of buying pressure at the $4,300 mark. Okay, so it's going to be an area of support if we retest that. So just know from a macro perspective, we're good in that sense. That's why we're still looking pretty decent here overview, because we're above all moving averages. But once more, this is getting close, right? So we got the 20-day SMA hanging out there with our short-term ascending trend line. That is kind of a concept of concern, or I feel slightly concerned knowing we're getting too close to those moving averages. I don't really like to see that. But once more, if you look at its history, it was above its moving averages right there, and then it spent a good 2 or 3 weeks below that moving average, and now we're roughly a week and a half into being above it. So these are just kind of ranges, if you will. Try not to consider moving averages as support levels. They are nothing, even not remotely close to support. They're just areas of confluence that kind of let us know that the average trend is moving in either direction. All that said, we are below the 20 and the 50-day SMA. Generally not the greatest sign. We're still maintaining above the 200-day SMA, but once more, we've retested that level multiple times. So even though we have some confluence there at that 0.618 fib level at 44.50, then that level there is essentially it's got to be construed as a support range, but also the more often you test something, the more like it is to break. Okay, so there's a good chance if we continue to establish lower lows and lower highs, which we have done so far, that we're going to continue a bit lower. So all that being said, the bumper sticker here is that we're seeing some short-term, smaller time frame divergences, and those can oftentimes add up to larger divergences, right? So between now and whenever you consider trading, just know that the overall sentiment is moderately bullish in this coin, but we're potentially shifting that momentum here. So if we do see a divergence that close below that $4,500 mark, maybe just say this weekend, for example, that would be probably an indication that we're going to be progressing a little bit lower, perhaps that $4,300 range. But once more, these are just some thoughts from some guy on the internet, right? I hope that it makes sense and I described it correctly. Let's go ahead and move on to Solana and see what's going on next. Now, Solana is an interesting one. This coin always piques my interest just based on how strong it has been lately. But as per usual, what goes up must come down in most cases. So I'm not presuming we're going to see sub 200 in the near future, but I do think that 210 to 230 range, I think we saw with a lot of liquidation there, and more specifically 225 to 230, that could be a very realistic probability for us. So let's look here. First of all, open interest. This is the last 1 month of open interest. 235 is at support. Okay. Now, once more, it's not a super strong support, but we've already seen it retested here. So we could very well see that pivot and bounce here soon. Let me go ahead and check the 7-day, just double check, do our due diligence here. We can see that same level is reaffirmed with 245 as a local high. So 245 could be the next target as well, or just a resistance range for us. All that said, liquidation long delta is at 1.5 billion. That's not a heck of a lot for this coin, but it is still bullish nonetheless, implying that taking a short would have some inherent risks. Now let's look at the daily time frame, kind of work our way down. Actually, we can start with a 3-day, and I just want to kind of clarify this too here. This coin is pretty consistent about when it overextends itself, it will inevitably turn around. Okay, so it's good that it's consistent, but it's unfortunate that we're reaching that point right now. Having said that, we're at a 9 on TD sequential. Basically implying we've been moving in the same direction for 9 candlesticks in a row. Our previous 9 on TD sequential had a significant correction down to 153 from 205. So I'm not proposing we're going to see the exact same thing just because we are, 27 days of continuation in the same direction, but it kind of lets us know that we've had a pretty strong month for Solana. So what's to stop it from having a pretty bad month next month, right? Anyways, just some thoughts there. When we look here, of course, at 3-day, most things are looking pretty good with a stochastic divergence. That's really the only thing telling us we're going to shift momentum. So the concept here is that momentous indicators are telling us we are maxing out. We also are coming up close to our all-time high of that 255 to 260 range. Those are previous daily candlestick closures. So if you look here from before, what was it? It was back in roughly 2025 January of earlier this year. We can see that we hit that, obviously that high of 295, but we failed to close above 255 to 260. So we're right there in that range again. I think that the odds of breaking through that the first time is pretty low. More often than not, you're going to see a rejection off that level, which we may have already kind of considered that here at 253, right? We're pretty close. So suffice to say, I think a bit of a continuation lower to secure some profits for the larger market makers makes a lot more sense than presuming the price is going to go into all-time high territory. Those are just, once again, my thoughts. I hope I'm wrong. The price goes up. I have a pretty heavy spot bag in the 90s to 120s, so I'm perfectly fine with continuation higher. All that said, though, we look here, we can overall kind of understand that we are stochastically diverging while money flow index is high, and we rejected off 70 in the R side. Those are usually some pretty strong bullish signs here for obvious reasons. We also have consolidation in this range here, and the longer we stay in this range, the more likely we are to go higher too, though. So you got to recognize that even though we are overextended on the larger timeframes, if Bitcoin doesn't pull back to that 113K range, I think Solana is going to continue to progress overall much higher. So you got to recognize that the macro structure is still looking quite strong, albeit overextended. But if you look at the 4-hour time frame, we're seeing some smaller time frame divergences, which most coins are exuding this behavior. But it's nothing to be massively concerned with. I really don't dislike anything that I see here on the charts, really. So if you're going to consider a short, it's just based solely on the range that we're in and the likelihood of rejecting and continuing lower, just based on the premise that Bitcoin might pull back. Right, but if Bitcoin doesn't pull back, Solana is going to be the next one to leg up, at least to retest that all-time high territory of 250 plus. All right, so that's kind of the concept there. I'd be very cautious and careful, or apprehensive rather, if you're going to consider shorting this coin. While it's desirable, we don't have any full-on divergences just yet, minus a really small couple of moving averages. That's nothing to really consider a short into. So those are my thoughts there on Solana. Just before we take a look at the next altcoin, I want to recommend you consider trading with Bitunix. If you use my link to register down below or have in the past, you'll always be eligible for future trading competitions, but this one is awesome. It's probably the best one I've seen yet, with a full-on $16,000 individual prize pool, as well as a collective prize pool as well for the top 30 traders. Be sure to check out the link down below for more information. Let's move on to SUI here and double check this guy. SUI actually significantly overperformed recently, and now it's significantly underperforming. So it's been over and underwhelming in a lot of ways within the last 48 hours for majority of traders. So let's go ahead and see if there's anything kind of telling us which direction it may or may not head. We look at open interest. This is once again the last 1 month of trading. Easy round numbers, remember, 360, 350, and 340. Those are 3 solid areas of support. So if we do see 350 again, maybe worth considering a long, just because there's a lot of interest in those ranges. But the liquidation delta is bearish. So we've got a significant amount of bearish divergence. And then we also have more liquidation closer to the price point than we do the inverse. In other words, the price is more likely to go lower than it is higher because we have a lot of contributing factors here. Keep in mind, these open interest ranges are oftentimes magnetic influencers, if you will. So simply put, the price action will pull towards that level because those are areas of interest. That's the easy way to understand it. Once more, support, but also the likelihood of retesting those levels is higher. All that said, look at the 3-day time frame and see if there's anything that would maybe be worth kind of considering here. Now, if I saw correctly, there is a pretty significant macro structure here for this coin. So I do think that the overview here is pretty positive in a lot of ways, where we do see the price action kind of working itself into a pretty nice little breakout potential pattern. So just kind of let you marinate on that one for a moment there. That doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, but we are establishing lower highs and lower lows, but we're getting closer to potentially breaking out. And that's what kind of how patterns work here. It's that slow dynamic shift from bearish to bullish. It's kind of letting us know that we're pretty good position to see a potential further upside. We can also see that the macro structure is still in pretty good shape for this coin. The money flow index is rather low. I don't like that. It kind of implies that we don't have enough volume to sustain this current price point. So the daily time frame isn't like, the daily and 3-day time frames are not like mega bullish in my opinion, but they're looking pretty decent. We actually look at the daily time frame. We can recognize that we're maintaining above 50 in the RSI, stochastic swinging down. There's more propensity for further upside, even though we saw a really significant correction yesterday. We are probably more likely to break out than break down on this coin. But the thing you got to recognize is just how poorly it pulled back when Bitcoin pulled back. So if you look at this, you kind of compare, it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio for how strong it pulled back. And it's like barely responding well to the upside here when Bitcoin's already recovered quite well. So I don't really like that kind of pairing there. That tells me that if you're going to take a long, it's inherently more risky. More specifically, the reason why is because there's more shorts than longs right now, and there's more liquidation on the downside at that 340 range. So if I consider a long on this coin, I'm going to wait to see a better price point. Between now and then, I'd maybe lean a little bit more towards a short. I know it sounds crazy and ridiculous, based on the macro structure being so bullish, but these short-term trends, I think, are looking like we're going to be seeing a bit further of a downside here. Once more, it really depends on your trading style, right? If you are a large time frame holder, somebody that's going to be looking to trade SUI on for the long term, don't worry about selling. Don't worry about the pullback. Average in as the price goes down. I'm more so referring to those scalping traders, the short-term trends, if you will. I think this weekend, because today's been kind of flat, but for lack of better terms, we're seeing more sustainability, more money flowing in. I think we're more likely to see more money flowing out tomorrow, just based on the natural trends we've seen this year so far. All right, so that's kind of SUI for you there in a nutshell. Let's take a look here at XRP and just quickly identify on the monthly. Once again, we got 303 and 295 as those areas of open interest. So tons of support in this range. I do not like, however, the liquidation short delta. You may not be able to see it on your screen, but it's at 400 million to the downside, basically implying that we are very bearish here. And then there's more liquidation as low as 290. Okay. So I mentioned this yesterday, if I recall correctly. 290 to 295 is an interested area for myself. I'm interested in taking a long in those ranges, just based on those liquidation levels being swept and a lot of support in that 290 to $3 range. But you got to recognize too, larger time frames tell us that $3 is that structure there, that significant amount of support or resistance. And we got to presume that if we're going to be below that, we're going to stay below it, right? So we're going to need some kind of strong catalyst to get us above that level, because XRP is underwhelming compared to Bitcoin right now. At least, every time Bitcoin pulls back, it's 2x to the downside, and it's only 1x to the upside if Bitcoin goes up. So not the strongest coin to consider investing in as far as a short-term gains. And just to clarify too, in the 3-day time frame, let's go ahead and double check this. We're right there hanging out at the 20-day SMA, and that's usually not a bad sign. So don't think that I'm kind of hating on this coin at all, because the truth is the macro structure still looks decent, but that's all it is. It's decent. It's not great. We have a lot of divergences here, both with stochastic and money flow index. So I don't really like the daily time frame, or 3-day time frame rather. The daily, I think, is transitioning bearish, which we can see right there at 50 in the RSI, kind of holding that line with stochastic swinging down, money flow index pulling back. Just not looking fantastic here. So to those of you who are still in our short trade from 3 days ago, consider holding a little bit left profit open. We still have our trade open with a little bit left remaining, with our next target, I think, is at 295. So once again, it's not like a phenomenal situation, but looking at these timeframes here, there's more potential for further downside than upside. But as per usual, we're maintaining right there on the edge of disaster at $3. So 299.9 roughly at this point here. So not a lot of good stuff here overall. When we look here at the 4-hour, we're under 50 in the RSI too. So these are just generally unfavorable signs. While most coins are exuding bearish behavior on smaller timeframes, we're seeing that break of structure, so to speak, on the macro for XRP, and it's slowly forming. Hasn't happened yet, but we're really close to losing this level here and pushing a lot lower here to the potential, lower ranges of in the 290s, right? So I know what, I don't love it. This isn't a coin worth trading at this point. It's just my personal opinion. So as per usual, I have playout charts available on our Twitter, Telegram, and Discord. Be sure to check those out. That is available on social media. So be sure to reference that. And then obviously, if you want to become a better trader, once more, cryptocash.tech is a site link down below. We will look forward to work with you though in the future. Hope you have a great race of your day. Thanks again so much for your time. Be safe out there. We'll see you soon.